So today we're going to do something brand new. This is actually a new feature I just released in Sync Academy. It's going to be called Office Hours. And many of you that are in Sync Academy have lots of great questions about sync licensing. And a lot of times your specific situation or career, you might have some sort of nuance information that you need that is not necessarily covered in our tutorials or in just maybe any other material that you've essentially come through within our platform. So what I'm going to do is answer these questions to the best of my ability, of course. A lot of times these questions get me thinking about things that I don't know, and it makes me go research and understand a little bit more about this business. But I do want you guys all to hopefully get something out of these questions and answers, and maybe there's something in these questions that's really helpful for you. And even if not today, in the future, you might remember some of these questions. So, and hopefully the answers are helpful as well. So please do go grab yourself a nice cup of coffee, settle in. We're going to go through quite a few questions. And hopefully we can set some music producers on a more clear and focused path in their sync licensing career. So let's go ahead and get started. Sam, you got the first question right here. If your main genre is more popular in another country, would it be ideal to transition from BMI or ASCAP to a PRO in that country and pitch to libraries over there? My main genre is liquid drum and bass, which has a much greater presence in the UK than here in the US. Great question, Sam. So there's two parts of my answer for your question. Number one, in some situations, this is definitely a smart idea. So I usually recommend this the other way around. When there are members and sync licensing producers from other countries outside of the US, but they primarily want to work in the US, I usually let them know you probably want to partner with BMI or ASCAP, because when you're working primarily in a local US market, you probably want to have a local PRO monitoring those placements for you, collecting your royalties, and then shipping them off to you, because just less chances for things to fall through the cracks, for people to not report properly. Of course, it's going to happen no matter what, but you keep things more local to your situation of where you're getting the placements. And then you're going to find that you'll probably miss out on fewer missing royalties, essentially. Okay. But with this kind of a situation, here's my one caveat. In the short term, if this is what you really want to spend a couple of years doing, probably it does make sense to maybe just switch on over to PRS and completely, focus on UK libraries where you feel you're going to get more placements. The big asterisk I would put in your situation is that, a genre like liquid drum and bass will not stick around forever. Okay, so these kinds of subgenres of the EDM world come and go, right? For a while, my example I always use is dubstep. I got heavy into dubstep for a couple of years because it was all over the radio. Every artist was doing it. Skrillex was blowing up. Every library needed to follow this trend. Lots of TV clients were using it. Then that was gone. That was basically hot for 2 or 3 years, and then how often do you hear dubstep anymore anywhere? It's just gone. So what I would just caution you on is, if you are going to go 100% into that direction, go for it. But when it's run its course, and there will be a time within the next couple of years that genre will just not be hot anymore, because it just always evolves and the new sound will come in, just know that you might need to course correct and come back to a US-based PRO and start focusing more on this industry. Of course, the other thing you can do is maybe try to bring some elements that you love about the liquid drum and bass genre and hopefully find a home for them here in the US. Maybe you could do that now. So maybe just a slight alteration on your approach might be really fruitful for you. So hopefully that helps you there. All right, Ben, when creating an album to pitch and choosing your reference tracks, do you reference the tracks from your first choice library, or do you pick a variety of reference tracks, mixing and matching them from your top 5 desired libraries? Of course, the same genre, for the example he's talking about, is trailer orchestral. Sometimes a library has less than 10 tracks of a particular genre, and I may lack ideas for the remaining tracks to have a full 10-track album. Another very, very, very smart question. The biggest issue I have right off the bat looking at your question here, Ben, is that you're looking at a library and they have less than 10 tracks in the genre that you want to submit to them. Okay, so just be aware that could be the fact that they don't have a lot of demand for that style of music. So are you sure you want to go throw them another album if they've only got one 10-track album or less than 10 tracks, right? So just because a library doesn't have a lot of an album or a lot of a particular genre, that doesn't always mean that there's a huge opportunity for you to get a lot of placements with them because they are just kind of lacking in that sound. It's possible, and it certainly would be worth maybe a conversation with the library before you jump into that sound. But usually you want to see a good, 5 to 10 albums of a particular genre in a library's catalog before you decide it's worth my time piling onto that pile. Okay. So you want to see that there's sort of a proven demand with their clients. And that's how you're going to see that, is if they've already spent some time and money probably gathering a large number of albums for that. But in terms of picking a variety of reference tracks from a variety of libraries, for sure, you can certainly do that. Just be aware, though, that if you find that one library is a little bit higher quality than all the rest, don't think that you can kind of go pick one of the lower quality libraries and say, well, I was referencing libraries, so therefore I did my job. If you're going to go to many different libraries, be aware that you might find higher quality cues in some libraries versus others, okay? And so you always want to hold yourself to the highest possible standard. So for sure, reference and look at a couple of different companies and different catalogs and, get inspired as often as you need to. But keep that on the back of your head that I've even given you guys some recommendations in Sync Edge, and there's some music that's in these production libraries that's pretty bad. It's not that great. But that does not mean you have the permission to come to them with mediocre, bad music. You should not be doing that. You should see that as a huge opportunity and a big motivating push for yourself to bring them high quality A-level music. So hopefully that helps. All right, Brandon, if you pitched a whole album of tracks, about 10 to 15 on your SoundCloud because they ask for a SoundCloud link, and you get an email stating that they only take full catalogs, what does that mean? Like for libraries like that, do you send 30 or more tracks, or how much is a catalog with tracks? Yeah, so Brandon, usually what that means is you're probably pitching to a large company that's essentially not in the business of interacting one-on-one with individual composers. They're so large that at this point, their main focus is basically going to catalogs, companies that have their own producers and writers that supply them with music. And then they gobble up those companies essentially, and either split their publishing with them or have some sort of a working relationship. So a Mega Tracks would be like this, or an Extreme Music. So there are these larger companies that are sort of no longer in the business of working with somebody like you or I. They just don't. It's not really worth their time anymore when they're that large, because they could either work with you and get one contract to get your, let's say, 10 to 15 tracks, or there's another company that has a catalog of tracks. In a catalog, it's a subjective sort of term, but I would say, I don't know, at least 10 albums, something like that. Maybe 10 to 20 albums is kind of a minimum number you want to have if you're going to call yourself a catalog. So you got to have a significant number of albums all put together, either yourself or you've gathered other composers and writers and you guys create like a collective and call it a catalog. But it's the same amount of work for them to do one contract with you as it is to do one contract with that 10 to 20 albums, right? And they get a lot more bang for their buck with that company and with all those tracks and all that music that's with them. So yeah, those kind of companies, you're better off either focusing and creating a full catalog for yourself, or go look at what catalogs are serving them and try to find contact information for them. That's definitely your way into a lot of those bigger companies. That's definitely how I got into, I've been in Mega Tracks, 5 Alarm, Position Music, and 615 Music. There's been a couple of other ones. And usually all of those are coming into a situation where I partnered with a smaller catalog that had the opportunities to get distributed with those bigger companies. So that's definitely the way in with those. All right, Sayoko, would you Shazam test when finishing a track? Someone else's track may come up even though all of the parts are played by myself. What do you do if someone else's track comes up on Shazam? I noticed the sound of the synth, etc., and chords are similar, of course not intended, but Shazam picks them up, and since many people are using the same synth and native instruments products, my friend said that when she recorded everything by herself with real instruments, Shazam still picked up someone else's song. Yeah, so Shazam is not necessarily your golden standard for whether or not you are getting too close to somebody else's track, because as you see, I've heard of that before, that it can sort of pick up false positives and think that it's hearing something that's not really there. You could certainly do it and see, if you're stepping on somebody's track, but I don't think it's necessary. I think what you just need to do is create 100% original music, right? So staying away from those kind of pre-made loops, pre-made vocal melodies, pre-made leads, from a company like Splice or something like that. You want to stay away from something that's completely pre-made, because then it will potentially pop up very easily as stepping on the shoes of another composer. Even though you're legally allowed to do it with the terms of service, it can still open up headaches and problems and frivolous lawsuits thrown at you. So you don't want to do that. So I would say, especially when you're using a reference track, create an original chord progression. That's always a smart move. An original lead, if there is a lead in it. Drums can be very, very similar to your reference track. In fact, you can almost copy the exact beat. Obviously, you're going to go find your own drum samples. You're not going to obviously sample their track. You're going to create your own original, but you can kind of get away with, of course, the same BPM, pretty much the same drums, but it's the chords and the melody. Those need to be so distinctly unique and different from your reference track that people, when they hear the two, wouldn't say, oh, that's like identical. They should feel, it should be more of a feeling of, yeah, I could see how that was inspired by that, but it's definitely in its own lane. It's doing its own thing. It's singing its own song, so to speak. And all of this stuff is completely subjective. Copyright infringement is it's an art form, okay? Knowing and deciding what's too close, what's not close, very, very, very subjective. But to try to be as safe as possible, use your own creative energy, okay? And try to rely less on patches and pre-made presets and progressions, essentially, that you just have to click one button and it's doing something for you. And a lot of these plugins now do that. So trying to stay away from that as much as possible and create 100% original content. And most of the time you'll be in the clear. You know, I've been in this business for about 15 years now. I've never had a copyright lawsuit or even an infringement thrown at me at all. I've definitely gotten a note or two from a library saying, it's a little too close to this. Can we switch some things around? I've gotten those notes here and there, but it's never gotten to the point where it's been like a legal issue and I've been worried that I get sued or something. So if you're creating original music, you're generally going to be in the clear, okay? That's non-legal advice. Definitely not legal advice, okay? All right, John, Jesse, what is the best way to leverage an existing library relationship in a pitch email to a second or third library? My thought is to mention an ongoing partnership, but not name drop. My website would already have the details. Any other tips on the topic, pitching additional libraries to expand? Yeah, this is one of those things where it can go either way. You can do exactly what you did. You can let this library know, I'm not new to this business. I've been working with another production music library for the last 6 months, last year, last 2 years. And so I know how the industry works. I'm all aware of alt mixes and stems and licensing contracts and all that good stuff. That's kind of the main reason why you want to let them know that maybe you've been working with another library. It's not necessarily, it can be a little bit of a sort of kind of a resume booster to let them know, like, I'm working with this prestigious company or this great music library. And name dropping is not a bad thing to do. I don't think it's like, braggadocious or anything like that. But it's not so much about that. It's more about letting a library know that you're hip to the game. Okay, that's mostly what I think libraries are going to want to hear from you, that you're not a newbie. You don't have unbelievably unrealistic expectations about the industry. You're aware that it's a long-term hustle. The money's going to take a long time to come in through those royalties, that you're here to serve their needs, right? They just need to see that kind of service mindset in your email. So whether you are brand new to a library or you're trying to reach out to a second or third, however you want to communicate that to them and let them know, I know the deal here. I am not a newcomer to this industry. I know how this works. And even if you are a newcomer to this industry and this is your first library you're submitting to them, if you're in Sync Academy or you've been following my YouTube channel, you can let them know that you are aware of how the business works. You understand it's a long-term play. You understand that building personal and direct long-term relationships with them is very valuable, and it's something that you hold as a high value that you want to push with them. This is definitely what you want to do with them. So that kind of language is what's going to perk their ears up and go, hey, this isn't a flake. This doesn't sound like a flake, at least we'll see, but sounds like somebody who's really serious about this, and it's worth our time and energy to bring them on board and get paperwork and, get them all set up with our company. So that's really what you want to communicate in any way that you'd like to when you approach that second library. All right, Scott has a question. What is the ratio of synced songs to the number of songs you've made for TV that have not been used for sync licensing? I think what you mean is, how many of my tracks get plays versus don't. This is a tricky question. I've never actually gone and done the math. I can tell you just at first glance from, getting my royalties over the years and knowing how much music I've put out there. It's a small number of my tracks that have gotten the majority of my placements. Now, how many total have gotten placed? I'd say between 30 and 50, maybe 60% of my tracks have been placed. So a large number of them have collected dust on the shelves of music library websites, okay? That might sound like a big bummer to some of you guys. To me, it's just a part of the business. You can't really know which tracks are going to be really useful for what clients. Of course, as the years have gone on, I think that percentage is, of course, ticked up and ticked up and ticked up just because more and more clients and more time have gone by. So there's just more chances for more of my music to get placed. But What I normally find with the libraries that I worked with, I would always put out like an album with them at a time, 10 to 12 tracks. And usually there's a title track, which is probably the strongest one on it. And a lot of times the album was named after that title track. That's normally the one that gets the most placements because it has the title of the album on it. I don't know, just might be the strongest track. It's just the most compelling for whatever reason. That one is sort of the shining star of that. And then there might be 3 or 4 others that occasionally get a placement. And then, of course, the last 5, 6, something like that, usually don't get any placements. So does that mean I should not do a full album? I should only put together 4 or 5 tracks and that's really all I should focus on? You could make that argument, but again, you don't always know what could be relevant. A lot of times, like I said, one of my biggest, most notable placements I received in my career was a national Jack in the Box campaign. It was for their Monster Tacos campaign back in 2014. And the track that they decided to use was a sort of very rushed, I'll be honest, not one of my A game rock tracks that I ever put together. It was sort of a last ditch. I got to cram this into this album that I deserve, or that I'm owed, or that is due for this library, and I have to make sure that I fill up this full 10 tracks for this album. So I basically quickly threw on a couple of extra ones, and that was one of them, and it ended up being a national campaign. So you don't really know. That's the whole thing with this industry. You really don't know. That's why my approach has been to kind of build up your numbers of licensable tracks, because and don't take that as an example that you can just throw up garbage to your libraries. Don't take my example for that, okay? Definitely put your best effort forward. But you just don't really know. And so all you can do is just constantly crank out new music, keep it as high quality as possibly can, and constantly have these conversations with your libraries and ask them what can you possibly do to make their lives easier with their clients, okay? Philip, if you have a couple of genres that you excel at, would you concentrate on writing in those styles, or would you recommend creating a diverse catalog? So for people that are just getting started in sync licensing, like if you're just approaching music libraries for the first time, you got to focus on one genre. In fact, I have a really helpful tutorial that I released on YouTube. I'll actually link it below so you can watch that after this one, on how to help you decide which single genre you should really focus on. As you get into this business, you cannot come to them saying, I am the master of all these different genres. I will get all of your placements. Take me on board. You want to go find one particular sound, one particular genre that you really, really can do well at. And I understand you feel that you can do this well on a couple other ones. But if you're really honest with yourself, there's probably one that shines above the rest of them. That's the one you want to get started in. You want to get your foot in the door. You want to create sort of a niche for yourself with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 libraries. Trust me, as time goes on, you will diversify. You will be able to spread out and start making more music in many different styles, many different genres. It'll just happen. Your library will just start asking you, what else can you produce? We've got this other client that needs this kind of music. Can you throw in for that? Those kind of opportunities will just start happening, and you will. I got into so many different types of like genres that I never produced before sync licensing as a result of this business. So trust me, you will not ever be pigeonholed as the one genre guy. It will eventually blossom and open up. But getting into the library, definitely focus on one. And check out that tutorial below after this video if you want to learn more on how to do that. And this will be the last one for this video. We'll do a part 2 to this. We've got more questions that are coming, but we will certainly finish up strong, hopefully, with this one. So Andreas, he's asking, if you're starting out in sync and you got a complete catalog of 30 tracks in a genre, wow, that's a lot. Is it better to pitch an album with 10 to 12 tracks or the whole catalog? Specific album would be, for example, Stadium Swagger Rock, and a catalog would contain all things rock, from classic to really hard and heavy stuff. Okay, I actually had an interview with one of my students about this very issue many years ago, probably 2018. But one thing that I want to just press to all of you guys, if you've got 30 tracks in it, that probably took you, I don't know, at least a couple of months, Andreas. I don't know, maybe even half a year or a year. It's a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort went into that. The issue is, if you send all 30 tracks to one library on day one, even if they're like, wow, that's amazing, and we'll take you on today and we're getting you started, you've really kind of put all of your eggs in one single basket, right? So what if this library looks good on paper, website looks awesome, maybe even got it as a recommended Sync Edge library, somebody from me, right? And you think, well, I'm sold, and I'm going to give them all that music. There's still, even with all that great stuff, all those check marks on it, there's no guarantee that your tracks will get placed, that their clients will find your music useful, that they will be pitching you very quickly. So you run into this risk of all 30 tracks sitting in a catalog that might be wrapped up for many years, maybe even in perpetuity, and you have nothing to compare it to, right? Now you got to basically start fresh with another 30 tracks and go find another library. So I do recommend, I think, getting them a 10 to 12 tracks in your Stadium Swagger Rock. Give one library that album. If they accept it, if they're like, this is awesome, immediately email them and say, do you want more of that? These are the other types of music I can provide. Is there anything else I can do for you guys? Start creating that relationship while with a library B, you take another 10 or 12 tracks from your catalog and create a new relationship with another library. That way you can A/B compare, you can A/B test. I wish there was some sort of a magic mirror we could look into and realize this is what the future will be with this library. They'll get you this many placements and earn you this much income and this many sync fees. We just don't know. And even I cannot give you guys any amazing clarity in terms of what you can really expect from these companies. I really can't, because it's all out of my control. It's all out of your control. A lot of times it's out of the library's control. It's really up to the TV film clients and what they want and what they're willing to put into their projects, right? So don't put yourself at a disadvantage where you have all of your eggs in that basket and it potentially is sinking and collecting dust and not doing any good. So be smart about this kind of stuff. Give a little bit to one, give a little bit to another. Don't spread yourself out too thin. Having 3 libraries that you're constantly feeding music to, unless you're doing this already full time and you don't have to have a day job, that's a lot of work. I would say definitely 2 is kind of maxing it out in terms of how much you can give to this business. So those are my thoughts on these questions. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys found these answers useful. If you have questions like these about your particular situation and what you're doing, or just anything else about the business that you're confused about, you'd like some clarity on, I encourage you to consider joining us in Sync Academy. This year, we are ramping up and updating some amazing features with Sync Academy. If you're not aware, we now offer real licensing opportunities with our Music Library CEO in the platform. So all members who join Sync Academy can pitch to them, and you can learn more about that by clicking on the link in the description box below. These office hours are obviously going to be a new feature, so you can get your questions answered in a custom basis like this. And we are also going to be updating many of our tutorials this year. I know last year I was kind of really focused on pro feedback and getting that service up and running, but that one's really doing well now, and the members are doing great there, and the pros are doing amazing work there. So that one I can kind of take my fingers off of, and now we can really get into updating a lot of our tutorials in Sync Academy, including a whole new series we're going to be releasing about working with vocalists and adding licensable lyrics and vocals to your sync tracks. That's really going to be our focus in 2023, because that is definitely the new trend and something that all of you guys need to at least get your fingers and get your heads wrapped around. It doesn't mean you have to focus 100% on vocals, but you are going to need a little bit of education on that topic if you want to stay relevant in this industry.